Can the Vikings keep getting away with these fraudulent wins? That question and so many more on Twitter Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. You can find this show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. You can have it right there on your smart TV. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. To download this game, just visit ultimate-gm.com. or look it up on app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game store. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. It is Twitter Tuesday. And by the way, hope you guys were able to enjoy the recap podcast a day early since it was a Saturday game. We'll probably do that for the Giants game as well. If you couldn't download it, or if there were like problems with the download, try again. There was a problem on the back end with the site we use to like push out the podcasts. That should be fixed now. So if you missed some of that, go back. You can finish it up. It's Twitter Tuesday. So that means I am taking your questions submitted by you, my lovely cherubs. If you have questions for me, you can send them to me anytime at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter, or fill out the Google form in the show notes, or send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Also, leave a YouTube comment. I will probably see it. The first question that I'm going to do is from Anti-Gravity, who says they can't keep getting away with this, right? And that's the question every single time. Yep, they can. Will they? Who knows? But they certainly can. Certainly it is possible to keep getting away with this. Just because an improbable thing happens once doesn't mean that the same improbable thing won't happen. That is called the gambler's fallacy. Like when you're at a roulette rule and there's been 6 black rolls in a row and you're going, well, certainly it can't be black again. It's the same odds as it always was. But to like a greater point about like sustainability, because I mean, by like every way we know to look at teams, and if you look at like a lot of the national stuff, the football outsiders of the world, the PFFs and stuff, they're going, yeah, this keeps being unsustainable. They're, like 26th in DVOA. They're bad at this EPA stat and all this stuff. And all these aggregate metrics are telling you this shouldn't be happening, but it is happening. And there is some signal there that, hey, the Vikings are not like the Eagles. They're not like the Bills, right? And we've known this, right? I don't think anybody is saying, yeah, this team absolutely as good as the Eagles, right? The Eagles are on something else right now, or like just like as scary as the Chiefs, right? I think we understand that there are other problems with this team, with the way the defense is playing, with problems in the offensive line, inconsistencies. But that's okay because regression ran out of time. They don't. There's no more regression. They can regress all they want. They won the division. It just kept happening. It did keep happening. And so if it doesn't keep happening, which it might not, right? We don't know. That's fine. They can regress. They can lose all the rest of their games. They would drop one spot in the standings, and that would be it. And it would affect where the home and away game would, like where the game is played if they end up playing San Francisco in the divisional round. Like that is how much a 3-game losing streak can hurt them. It just doesn't matter anymore if they regress. Now, here's the deal. If they are regressed and they play bad in the playoffs, then it does matter, but that's a 1-game sample. So the Vikings, I don't know if you even call that regression. They've had bad games, right? They had a horrible half against Indianapolis. They had the Dallas game. Like that has been in them. Is that regression, or is that just them doing what they do? Or if they can go, 4 games in a row without that happening, they win the Super Bowl, right? If they can go 4 games in a row without that happening and they win them all, boom, there's the Super Bowl. That's what you have to do. And those inconsistencies, those improvements are what I'm looking for going into the playoffs. Can the defense keep up some of the stuff that it did, especially in the second half against the Colts? That's going to be what I'm looking for, right? But can they keep getting away with it? Sure, they could fraud their way all the way. Like, yeah, can they keep winning close games? Are you going to tell me that they can't win a close game? And that's the thing about like regression and sustainability, that I think there's a really big difference between people who understand regression and people who don't. And it's like shown by this game. This was like an overcorrection of regression. I think I talked about it on the last show. It was an overcorrection. They got a lot of unlucky stuff after a season of a bunch of lucky stuff. That's not regression. That's like improbability the other way. It's not the middle of the bell curve, right? Regression suggests that you're going to go back to the average, not all the way to the other side to make up for what happened in the early parts. And I don't know. Some people understand that. Some people don't. My uncle, Gary. Hi, Gary. Excited to see you on Christmas. Says, the D played much better this game. What were the big changes in approach that you noticed? Okay, the big one for me was, so you could say, oh yeah, like some people said that they saw more blitzing, they saw more Harrison Smith on the line of scrimmage. I think so. But the big one was man coverage. They lived in cover one a lot more. And I think they could get away with it because it's the Colts, and the Colts receivers are fine, but Michael Pittman and like Alec Pierce are not exactly striking the fear of God into you like AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, for example, would. Or like, going up against Stephon Diggs and Isaiah McKenzie in Buffalo, like that kind of thing. And I think it might be the same with the Giants. Like Darius Slayton, I love Darius Slayton. He's their best receiver, and when that's your best receiver, like that room needs help. And I think every Giants fan will probably agree that room needs help. But the man coverage that they went to was something Tom Pelissero talked about before the game. I don't know why they didn't do it more in the first half. They probably should have, but the second half, at least, there was a lot of that. And the way that they enabled it was that they had Patrick Peterson stay on the boundary side, the short side of the field. So I did not know why that was a thing. So I actually asked a bunch of coaches, got some great answers, and I'll pass that along to you. The reason you put Patrick Peterson on the boundary side of the field, and then I think Cam Dantzler played like a little bit in this game, but then he went out, and it was illness, by the way. Some people were wondering about that. It was illness. They were being like cautious with Dantzler's. I'm going to guess like it was a fatigue thing with illness. And that's why Duke Shelley got so much run. And we will talk about Duke Shelley in a bit. But Duke Shelley was on the field side, on the wide side, the longer side of the field. So if you're on the left hash, it's the left side's the boundary, the right side is the field. Advantage of that is geometry, is the answer that I got. And if you just think about where the ball needs to go, we talk about this when we evaluate quarterbacks all the time. And in particular, it's actually really relevant to evaluating Kirk Cousins' game. Throwing from the opposite hash to the sideline is a lot harder than throwing to the sideline that you're closer to, right? That's just more space. And there were a lot of opposite hash throws in this one from Cousins. So when you're on the boundary side, when you're on the tighter side of the field, you just got to react a little quicker. You just have to be a little bit tighter. And when you're on the wider side of the field, you may have a little bit more time. So it's, in a sense, a way of protecting Duke Shelley. It's like the smallest way. You're not putting him in cover two where he just has to go shallow. That's the most you can do to hide a cornerback. That's what Mike Zimmer was doing when it was Cordrea, Tankersley, and Chris Boyd and Chris Jones. He was just living in cover two because those corners couldn't do anything else. In this, you're playing man coverage, but even think about like a crossing route across the field, which is a way to attack man coverage. When you're on the wide side and they're going to run across, they don't have as much room to get open on you as when you're starting on the short side of the field and you have to follow them all the way across the hash and then through the wide side of the field. So basically making everything a lot harder on Patrick Peterson to make everything a little easier, or a little harder on P2 to make everything a little easier on Duke Shelley. That enabled them to feel good about playing man coverage. And then when you're in man coverage, you got 5 guys on 5 receivers. It opens up your safeties to do different stuff. You can put Harrison Smith in the box and blitz. You can blitz linebackers. You can do a whole bunch more. This is what I've been talking about for the entire season, waiting for them to install this stuff, saying, yeah, a Fangio defense without this stuff is not really a Fangio defense. It's this like training wheels bastardization that is going to get shredded. This is what you need to be able to do, and you need to be able to trust your corners. If that means you got to flip them between wide and boundary, then great, do that. Being able to find that now is awesome, and especially now that they've won the division, they can sort of have 3 games worth of practice of doing it this way, and hopefully come playoff time, they will have a good cover one package that they can pull out that there won't be a whole lot of tape on. David says, do you think our defense is playing good? Our defense playing good as a fluke, or is it sustainable? Skull from Birmingham, Alabama. All right. Hey, there was a moment where they could have become the Birmingham Vikings. Watch the history documentary at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Episode 5 is where that comes up. Sustainability on defense. They can. I mean, I'm not going to predict whether they will or not, but they definitely can sustain this if that man coverage thing continues to work. I think against New York, against Green Bay, and against Chicago, these last 3 games, there's not really wide receivers to be scared of in those games. Yeah, like Darnell Mooney's out for the season, right? You got like Chase Claypool. There's, Christian Watson seems to be coming along a little bit. You have Darius Slayton. These are quality dudes, but these are dudes that don't scare you. You don't scheme around Darius Slayton. You run man coverage in that and you take your lumps if he beats you. So I think they will be able to run a lot more man coverage. Will it hold up? I guess, only time will tell. But I do think that change can be made permanent if the Vikings so choose. James K says, Duke has been lauded for his play in this game, and deservedly so. Did he do anything different in this game versus the ones where he got victimized, or is it just a byproduct of facing a weaker wide receiver core? So yeah, a lot of the stuff I talked about, he was protected. It was Alec Pierce. Like, that's not going to be exactly as hard as covering like Terry McLaurin or whatever. So all of that stuff, but I don't want that to take away from Duke Shelley's game. He had a good game. He performed well. The coaches put him in a circumstance where he could perform well. That's exactly what you want. And assign credit, I don't know, however you see fit. I have a bunch more questions to get to, so don't touch that dial on this radio that you are listening to this podcast on. But first, let me talk to you about Ultimate Football GM. It's a mobile franchise. It's like a franchise mode kind of game on your phone. It's super, super fun. You can be NFL GM. You can manage the salary cap, trade players, draft picks, and navigate your franchise through all of that roster building stuff. I know you guys love talking about roster building because I get draft questions in the middle of the season and free agency. What's their biggest offseason need? Y'all love the offseason. So get on Ultimate Football GM, and Locked On Vikings listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps, so make sure you check it out today. To download the game, visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Start your dynasty today. I also want to talk to you about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. You can get anything on Turo brought to you oftentimes by a Turo host, whether it's a spacious minivan or something so the whole family can come, whether it's an electric car you're just looking to test out, or something affordable that just needs to get you from point A to point B without breaking the bank. You can find it at Turo. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. So forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. I'm on it on Monday. Had a fun little back and forth with Peter Bukowski, who hosts that. It covers all sports from all angles, all the biggest headlines and games and everything. Let's move on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. The next one comes from Waka Waka, who asks, did the Vikings finally learn how to run a screen, or did the Colts just play it really bad? So when you house a, 64-yard screen, there is always going to be it takes two to tango a little bit when it comes. It's like knocking up your prom date, all right? Both people need to be involved in that. The screens the Vikings ran were, I think all the successful screens were tunnel screens, which is the one that they have been like the least bad at. So they finally just got some good tunnel screen timing together. But yes, the screens were well timed. Everybody was arriving to the spot they were supposed to arrive at the time they were supposed to arrive there. And that's been the problem with all the screens forever for this whole team. But it's only one kind of screen. So I'm a little bit worried that they're going to overdo it, that they're going to go to this tunnel screen too much. Because if you want to see what happens when tunnel screens happen too much, look at the other side of the ball. The Colts ran a ton of that exact same play, and it was timed out fine, but the Vikings were able to sniff it out because they ran it on third down like 4 times. And it just got too predictable. So hopefully they won't overdo it and they'll pick their spots. That will be something to see, though. And with a new play caller, that's kind of one of the things to watch, right? Zach asks, last time the Vikings won a crazy emotional game. Oh, a bunch of people asked something like this. They came out super flat the next week and got stomped by Dallas. Do you think that kind of hangover is real? And if so, should we be concerned about the Daniel Jones-led Giants? Hey, the Giants are a real team. I've been hating on them quite a bit. Beating Washington in prime time kind of means that it doesn't matter anymore because they put themselves in a good enough position. Well, they'll be in the playoffs, and we might even see them in the playoffs. There's a pretty good chance. So yeah, the Giants are absolutely a real team to take seriously, right? And some people said like trap game and blah blah blah. No, you can't. I've said this a lot. A trap game has to be a spread of like 2 scores. It has to be a team that absolutely sucks. You have to have like a good team on the other side of it. And it like there's only like 3 teams in the world that I would call like trap game worthy, like the Bears, the Texans. I don't know, maybe like the Cardinals, or I don't know who's like else is worse in the league, Broncos, that kind of game. So sure, be worried about the Daniel Jones led Giants because they're a decent team. That hangover, I think, is absolutely real. And emotionally, like the Bills game and this game felt way different. The Bills game felt like, I mean, they were partying. I think that was the game where Kirk took his shirt off on the plane. Like they were having so much fun and it felt so good. And they really celebrated the heck out of that game. And then they were a little flat the next time. And maybe that is an emotional hangover. It was very similar to like the locker room after the miracle. It just felt like, oh my God, did we really get away with that? This one, the emotion was a little bit more serious. It was different. It was, I mean, you had Eric Kendricks and Dalvin Cook and Kevin O'Connell all choking up after the game, talking about how much they all mean to each other. Kirk Cousins got a little emotional in the when Tom Pelissero approached him just like on the field right after the game and told him, "You just made the biggest comeback ever," and he was like genuinely taken aback. It wasn't quite as, let's get the music on and let's like start bumping in this place. It was a little bit like, you guys are everything to me. This is so special. And it was different. I don't know if that means that there will be less of a hangover or not, but it does feel like it is a different emotion. I'm curious to see if that does lead to some kind of hangover. Trill Swaggets asks one, this is from last week, says, am I justified in being irked by Donatel's comments? It seems to be at odds with this new culture of accountability. So people talked about how, Donatel said like it's execution and not scheme. And I guess if you want to be bothered that he didn't do the right thing and, everybody's supposed to say everything is their own fault. Sure. Here's what I'll say about that. The players have said that too. I think it's just the truth. And I'm never going to be too mad at somebody for saying what's true. Sure, the right political thing to do is to just say, we all have to do better and say some platitude. I don't really want pressers to be that, though. Pressers that are all platitudes all the way down kind of suck, but I guess you don't get people saying this about you, so I guess that's why they do them. That's just me, but you be irked by whatever you want. Ruben Frost, smart football boy, asks, hi Luke, long time, first time. I know that's false. Says, why haven't we seen Kene Wangu as a part of the offense? There's 2 things. A, he might just not be doing as well as I thought he was doing in camp, and that's fine. But also, the Vikings have been very samey with their 11 personnel. It's like really, really often TJ Hawkinson, Osborne, Thielen, Jefferson, and then Dalvin Cook. Sometimes they swap out Alexander Madison. Sometimes they swap out Johnny Munt. There isn't really a package for Kene Wangu, except when it's like down to depth, like at the end of the Cowboys game or whatever. And I think that sameness with the 11 personnel is part of hiding your intentions, where it's just harder to figure out because what package is this one? Their normal 11 personnel is out there and it can be anything. And they kind of use that to make it harder for the defense to read things pre-snap because you don't get any tells off the personnel. That's valuable, and they might not want to jeopardize that value just to get your running back 3 on the field and get him some run, right? They're probably happy enough with him as depth, but they just won't turn to depth as much as maybe a Zimmer-led team would have that we've been used to for the last 8 years. Couple more questions to get to, so we will get to those here on Twitter Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast. First up, though, let's talk about daily fantasy, specifically Prize Picks. PrizePicks.com is where you can play daily fantasy. Made easy. Forget full lineups. Forget gigantic pools with 600,000 people in them. How about just you against the house? Just pick a few players and whether they will do better or worse than their Prize Picks projection. You can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. Prize Picks offers projections on anything too, not just NFL, but you could do soccer, you could do NBA, you could do college basketball, you could do baseball when it's in season, hockey, all of that stuff, and you can make your entries in 60 seconds or less. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. Deposit 50, get 50, etc. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag, few more to get to here. The next one comes from Skull Page, who says, would there be any utility in switching up more personnel combinations in base, i.e. a 5-down lineman or 3-3-5 defense? So, sure. I think so. And I think they have been doing more of that. A lot of people have asked me about Brian Asamoah. I'm going to look, I'll get back to you on Brian Asamoah, but I'm going to look into it. Into him, I think, pretty closely this week because I think he got more run than he ever got this week. And it has been steadily increasing as the season goes on. Like they're just folding him in. He is very clearly eventually going to overtake Jordan Hicks as the starter. Kevin O'Connell cannot stop raving about this guy. He's eating into Jordan Hicks's snap count more and more and more. A 4-3-4 nickel package, like an old school 4-3 might be what you're asking about. 5-down lineman is their base. That is, they'll have 5 guys, and depends on what you mean by down lineman, because Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith technically count as linebackers, so maybe it's like a 2-4-5 or a 4-2-5, depending on how pedantic you want to be about it. But that is, Hunter, Zadarius Smith, Harrison Phillips, Dalvin Tomlinson, and then it's usually Jonathan Bullard. It's been James Lynch with Bullard hurt. Those guys down. That's their base. Now, they're not in base a lot because teams always have 3 wide receivers on the field, so you're nickel most of the time. You lose James Lynch, you get Chandon Sullivan. But sure, yeah, that gets worked in a lot. It's mostly a response to when the other team comes out with more bigs on the field, like more tight ends or more running backs on the field and less wide receivers. So maybe, but I think like a 3 safety kind of nickel package might be something worth doing. And it's something that they did a lot of in camp before Lewis Seen got hurt as a way to get him in, or they even did it with Josh Metellus some. They've even done it with Josh Metellus some this season. So they do have some of those switch ins. But the thing is, the more you switch in those role players, the more you're switching out players that you decided in preseason are better than those guys. So there's a trade-off. Jeff Douglas says, Ingram stepped on Kirk's foot for the 3rd or 4th time this year. Shouldn't that be a pretty simple mistake to clean up? Why does it keep happening? So why it keeps happening is a footwork issue. I went over this on Patreon when it happened. I think it was the Bills game where it happened twice. But the issue is when Ed Ingram takes his steps for a lot of, this is on running plays, and I think this happened on a pass play that was like play action too. When you are doing zone footwork in particular, you'll take, I call it a bucket step. I know there's a million different words for it, but I'll call it a bucket step, which is a step like laterally with his left foot. And that step should be lateral, or it should be like a pick up and put down, like an in place step, like almost like a phantom step where you just rotate your foot 90 degrees, but it shouldn't go back. And it's going back on him a little bit. It's just a fundamentals habit. That's one of those things you kind of have to drill over and over in an off season, but you don't have time to do that when you're trying to prepare for a team every week. So that might be why it keeps happening, but it's definitely something that you're going to have to drill in your off time, and you just kind of hope that this doesn't come up again. But it is a footwork issue. CFB playoff hater says, which player would you chase in a locker room and demand that they talk to you? So this is referencing what happened. There was something in the locker room with Giovanni Bernard, and I didn't see the clip, so I won't speak to it, but a lot of people are really worked up about it. But if I were able to be in a locker room and I wanted to go talk to anybody, I probably would be chasing down like Kirk Cousins, right? And I would want to ask him about what you see on this play, blah, blah, blah. I would want to like nerd out about that stuff, or like Harrison Smith or Patrick Peterson, people who are tasked, Eric Kendricks with the green dot, people who are tasked with some of the more schematic, like actual decisions, adjustments in game and stuff. Probably Chandon Sullivan has some of that too. I would want to ask those guys stuff like that. But I don't know. I won't get into the whole thing about like how nice you should be to people. Mirgondo says, how did Darisaw play in his return back to action? I didn't see much from his side, which I'm assuming is a good thing. I saw a few things from his side and all of them were good. I usually have watched all the tape by the time I record this. I'm recording this a little early because of the holidays are messing with my schedule, but so I'll get back to you on that for sure tomorrow. But my live viewing and what I've seen so far is there are a couple of plays where he just like DJ Jazzy Jeff to guy, which is just kind of what he does. My new comp for Christian Darrisaw is Uncle Phil because he's just like throwing people out of the house. But I think he did really, really well. There were a couple of there's one play. It was the Adam Thielen touchdown. If you watch the Adam Thielen touchdown, and there are definitely clips on Twitter of all 22. As I record this, I will probably post one at least on Patreon, if not Twitter too, where you see Yannick Ngakoue actually beat him inside, and the way he recovers is really, really, really nice. For me, O-line play is as much about the recovery as it is as many times as you can just stalemate and not have to recover. Because eventually every O-lineman will give up space, will get beat. Sometimes it's not even their fault. Sometimes your inside help wasn't there. Like that is a situation every O-lineman, no matter if it's Marshall Yonda all the way down to TJ Clemmings, will all deal with this. And how you deal with that, I think kind of separates the men from the boys. And that particular rep was a really, really good recovery. You got beat inside and he took him all the way to the inside, took him past the center, and now you can't get to the quarterback, right? And you made it work. Ugly wins are my favorite O-line thing. That was just one play, though. I think on the whole game, seemed like he did pretty good, but I will circle back to that. Daniel Hagan says, which one of Brian Asamoah or Austin Schlottmann would you say is more likely to start the first playoff game? Definitely Asamoah. Schlottmann, I thought, did it okay. I didn't clock anything majorly bad with him so far for this game. He was kind of a disaster in the Lions game, though. So one good one bad one in relief of Garrett Bradbury. So as long as Garrett Bradbury's healthy to go for the playoff game, that will be him. I don't think we're having that conversation at all. Kevin O'Connell's been kind of cagey about his injury status, though. So I don't know. Maybe we will see Schlottmann, but I think if it were up to the Vikings, for sure, it would be Asamoah. Similar question from U2 fan who said, any insight into the LB rotation on Saturday? I noticed different combinations using Kendricks, Hicks, and Asamoah. So my understanding so far with the way they've used Asamoah is that he's going in on pass-only downs, but on run downs, it's a little bit more of Jordan Hicks. Jordan Hicks did a really good job of shooting the gap, which is a very aggressive thing to do. When it's a run play and you see the run is going one way, a lot of times on a zone play, a lot of times the linebacker in the way that the Vikings play the run is supposed to sort of relate to the running back and flow with him and then go try to make a tackle to the outside. They play like spill and kill or whatever. But if you see a lane to the running back and you can just shoot off and get him, screw it, go get him. Zimmer would kind of say, hey, if he can make it, he can go. And I think it's about the same. I think that's a league-wide thing. Like, if you want to shoot the gap, if you can make it, go get him. And I thought Hicks did a really good job with that, and that can be some of those really beautiful run stops. Asamoah does that a lot, and sometimes he's wrong in doing it, and that's part of the reason he hasn't seen the field as much as Hicks. But in coverage, I think they're starting to trust him a little bit more. So I think it's a little bit about like on, a 3rd and 13, we're going to have Asamoah. And also Asamoah's been used as a spy a little bit this year. That's where I think it's at right now. Tomorrow, I'll circle back to a couple of these questions. I'll talk to you about like if I saw anything crazy with Duke Shelley. I'm definitely going to talk about Kirk Cousins a lot tomorrow because I think there's some cool stuff to learn about the game that he had. And we'll circle back to that Christian Darrisaw thing as well. We'll do a little bit of a tape review. So that'll be tomorrow on the Locked On Vikings podcast. See you guys all then. Check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. Check me out on patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL. And as always, Skol.